Hello and welcome to Ivory Blush Roses. My name is Lisa and I'm so grateful you're here with me today. I finished stitching on the autumn bell pull in the last video, and today I'm going to take a look at the changes I want to make to the other blocks and get it ready to put together. Let's take a look at these blocks. This block I've decided I'm pretty happy with. There's really nothing that I want to do additionally to that block. So we'll set that one aside. I love this block. It doesn't need any changes. This block, we're going to make one small change. And this block needs no changes. And I think we're going to say my block needs no changes except I need to get rid of the blue lines. And this block does need a couple changes. We're going to remove this swirly bit. And I actually think I'm going to move this leaf over here and do something else in here. So we're going to make some changes on that. So these are the two blocks we're going to do a couple of minor things on. And this one, it's the only landscape block without one of these mother of pearl birds. So I'm going to add this little bird down here. I'm just going to add one little bird sitting there. That's all that it needs. So let me see if I have a needle threaded with beading thread. I think we found it. This is just that kind of off-white, and it's going to work really well. So this is going to be a very simple and easy fix on this. Now my seam is going to be right here, so I want to make sure I'm staying away from that. I've got to give room for the machine to stitch these blocks together. Like any of the other big beads that I'm doing, I'm really going to be stitching this on with sort of a cross stitch, making a little X out of my thread, and that helps hold this little bird in position so it doesn't wobble quite so much. I'm going to come back and put one more straight through that hole. Let's do another one for good measure. There, little bird. Now all of those landscape blocks have one of those little birds on it, and to me that just helps finish it off. And since it's a bead, I'm going to do 2 knots. So that block is done. Now it coordinates with the other landscape blocks. And so this one, let's take out this stitching. So I'm going to start, I think, over in here where she sort of has some, not sure if it's knots, or we'll snip it in a couple of spots here and see if that helps. And then when I'm taking something out like this, I can use a bigger needle. This one's a good sturdy one, and I rarely use the point of it, and we're just going to pull out that stitching. Chain stitch and lazy daisies are not always really easy to remove. Well, I'm not going to sit and make you watch all of this because this is not very fun video to watch, just me pulling out stitches. So let me get this done, and then I will be back and we'll take a look what's to come. So I'm going to bring this leaf so it sort of comes up this seam a little bit, but it means I need to do something else in here. And I want to just take a quick look at these other landscape blocks. So let's figure out what I want to do there. Here is my seam line down here. So I think I want to tuck that leaf up. In fact, I may even unstitch that and tuck it underneath this, but I need to stitch something else right in there. And I don't think I'm going to do any swirly stuff up here. I'm going to go ahead and stitch this leaf down. I like it really coming straight out on that seam. So I just need a little something right here. I'm tempted to do just some similar leaves to this. Maybe we ought to bring that color down here. Let's do that. I'm pretty sure that this thread is a silk pearl. Let me take a quick look at those and make sure I know. Okay, so those look like a fly stitch leaf. And I'm going to try and overlap them a little bit with what's already there. And even though the color is going to be ever so slightly different, I think it's going to still work. I've got Mushu on the table here, getting into stuff again. So we're just making these little fly stitch leaves. I'm trying to mimic what she's done here. And even though my thread is slightly different, I think it coordinates well enough. It should look okay. So it's perhaps a little more purple than what she had. Now I haven't drawn these out or anything. I'm just stitching, and again trying to overlap things. I think we're going to throw just a few little lazy daisies in here in a few spots. So these are just little fly stitches just stacked right on top of one another, and then I come right up at the base of the last one. Just putting in a few more of those lazy daisies. So it's just adding a little bit of weight and it carries through. So now changes are made. All 3 landscape blocks are finished. I'm really glad to have those done. Now we can put it together. Well, let's talk about removing the blue marks off the block that I did. Now there are a couple of ways to go about it. The simple way is to go stick it under the faucet. Put it underneath, let the water run over it, blot it dry, and then usually I iron from the back side on a terry cloth towel. When you get it that wet, you really risk running, especially the red embroidery threads tend to run. So I don't necessarily want to do that. Another trick is to take just a spray bottle with water and just spray that. And it actually works pretty well. And you can see right up here, it just disappeared immediately. And then have something to blot it with pretty quickly. So you don't want to get everything, again, super soaked on that. So that works really well. And the other trick, if you're just trying to get a fine area, now this may not be as effective on this one just because I have so much of that blue, but you just can use a Q-tip and a little water, and it just allows you to direct it right where you want. And if you've got just a small area, that's a great trick to do. You can see that blue just comes right out of there. And the nice thing about doing it with the Q-tip is it's not getting super wet. That might be a good spot for the we're just going to blot that out. Yeah, and all that blue around that was going to be hard to get to just came right out. Yeah, I think we're good. So I'm going to let that dry. I am going to pin my blocks together. Where's my top block? This one is block 2 there, so it's going to go there. So I'm going to pin so that I know, and since I have my basting line, I really want to line those up. And I'm going to go through the corner of one, and I can see the corner here on the front side too, so I can line that right up. I'm going to do the same thing on the other corner. So I'm going to pin them together 2 by 2, and so this is block 3. My block is block 4. All right, so there's those. Now we'll do these. So this method is not absolutely perfect, but it usually gets me pretty close. The next step will be then to stitch these seams together, and then I'll open them out and press them, and then I'll stitch these together. I'm ready to stitch these seams. I'm just picking them up off the pile. I'll figure out which way they go in a little while. Let's see how that looks. Looking good. So I'm just going to match these seams again the same way I did before. With a pin in the corner here, I'm going to match. And then this one will go here. Let's do these others. All right, so there we are with that. So let me go iron the seams now. And then we'll take a look at them from the outside here shortly. All right, let's see how that looks. I need to pick my backing fabric. I wonder if I've got enough Onisberg. That would actually be a good backing fabric for this one. There's a little bit of that in each one of these blocks. Hello and welcome to Ivory Blush Roses. This is Hello Mushu, another Ramblings episode accompanied by Mushu, as you can see. I did a little bit of filming back in November when I actually stitched all the blocks together. Today we're going to put an interlining and a backing on it, as well as a quilt label on the back to show whose work is on this project. I'm going to show you this whole process of how I put together a bell pull. Let me show you what I'm using for materials to finish this off. I have my bell pull that I have finished. I have a piece of vintage flannel that I'm going to use as interlining for it. It's well worn and washed, and I think it's going to be just the perfect weight. I love flannel for interlining crazy quiltings. For the backing, I have this Omnigrid cotton, which is in each of the blocks. Every one of them has a piece in it, and I think that's going to make a great backing, but also a self-binding. I also have a scrap of muslin that I'm going to use to make a label for the back. And so I will label the blocks in order from top to bottom, and I'll put on it who stitched each block. And then I have my rotary cutter, a pair of scissors, and my tape measure, as well as my quilting ruler for cutting. The first step is to measure this bell pull. Let's see how long it is exactly. And I'm going to measure from my basting line, and it is 35.5 inches. I want a self-binding on here that's going to be 3/8 to 1/2 inch wide. To start with, I'm going to cut my interlining at 36.5 inch long. I'm going to measure both sides, and it's pretty close. I'm going to go 36.5, and then I want to measure the width of it. It does measure 6 inches on the basting line, so we're going to go 7 inches. So 7 by 36.5, and let's get that cut. The first thing I'm going to do is square off that edge. Yeah, it looks pretty square on both sides. So I know we said we wanted it 7 inches wide, and there's 7. There we go. Now I want to measure the length of it. There's my 37 mark, and I think we're pretty square. There's my mark. So there is my interlining. I will place that right on the back of that, and that fits pretty well. I need to decide, do I want to trim these edges now? Let's take our cotton here and take a look at this. I think we're going to need to take it along the length of it, just because it is going to be hanging and I want it to be straight. But let's just see. That's actually got a really nice fold in it already. What does it look like if we leave all of that selvage and do a wider binding around it? Actually, that's nice. I think that actually works pretty well. So I need to be thinking about how much extra I need on here. Let's just measure that. I think we're about 1.25 inches over, and that's pretty comfortable coming over. It's almost a 3/4 inch border on that. I need to move this. Let's just see, is that enough at the top? Actually, I think that works really well. So we're going to go 1.25 inches bigger all the way around. So I'm just evening this out where the edges are a little bit bobbly. I'm going to just neaten it up a smidgen. I don't know why, there's something so satisfying about that. It actually looks like we're pretty even. I don't see anything really hanging over, so that's good. So let me remeasure here. Let's see, we're about 7.25. So 7.25, and then 1.25 inches on either side. So that's 2.5 inches easy way for me to do it. I'm going to cut the backing 10 inches wide, and then I need to make sure I leave that top and bottom as well. So if we go 1.25 inches over, so 39.5 by 10 inches. 39.5 by 10. If I repeat it, hopefully I won't forget it. I've got that nice folded 1/4 inch already there. I'd rather be a little bit generous. Now I'm going to simplify this. It's probably not ideal, but we're going to line this up. And I really hate fabric wastage, so I'm going to try and fold this so there's not too much waste here. We said 39.5. I'm going to go ahead and cut it at 40. I can trim it down as I go. There's 20 inches. I could still pull that up another little bit. Again, keeping my ends nice and lined up. Yeah, that will do. That's better for me. Okay, so now I'm going to keep that. Let's go ahead and cut this. And I'm lining my 20 inches up on this fold up here. And that's cutting it pretty well straight on the grain. And now I can turn, I want to do 10 inches going this way. And again, that has given me just a little allowance. Now I have that. I'm going to line back up on my line. Make sure I'm lined up down here, and I'm just going to cut the rest of it. All right. So there is my backing. This will just get lined up roughly in the center. And then the bell pull down. That flannel gives it just that little bit of extra weight on the inside. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is going in and pressing my edges. Then we'll get the ironing board out, or ironing pad, and fold this up. So I already have this edge folded. So this edge is probably going to get a little bit bigger fold just to help even that out. And so I'm going to press all the way around it. I want to get this ironed. I also want to iron my interlining. The blocks have already been pressed out. Let's get these two things pressed. I'm ready to press this. So there's that. And that's just going to make it lay on the back of this so much nicer. Just line it up right down the middle of the back. I'm seeing that I have just a little bit of extra, so I'll go and trim that off in a minute. Osnaburg doesn't really have a right or wrong side. It's not going to matter too much. I'm going to go ahead and press that edge down that was already folded so nice and even. I'm not going to add any interfacing or anything because I've already got the interlining going on. And so now I'm going to press this, and I'm just eyeballing it. I've been sewing long enough. I've got a pretty good feel for maintaining an eye for what's even. And now I'm going to press over the ends. Cut it just a little extra big, so I'm going to be a little generous. So I think we've got a good 3/8 of an inch seam. And we'll do the same thing on this end. And if the top and bottom are a little bit wider, that's fine. That actually is a very common art thing to provide more space at the top and bottom than all the way around. So there's that. So next I'm going to get my pins, and we're going to put this on and pin it. So I want to try and center that the best that I can. And see, I've got a lot more space there. But we're going to do the sides first. I need to look at this and see, is it even? So I'm pinning roughly to my basting line. And if I pin to it and just slightly over it, then I don't have to take it out unless it shows. Once I figure out my top and bottom, I may trim this just a little bit so there's not so much bulk up here. Yeah, I don't mind that. Again, just trying to keep it nice and even all the way down, and hopefully even on both sides. And I actually wonder, so we're about 7/8 of an inch on each side. So I just need to watch that. So this, I may have a little bit of basting that I need to remove. And we're just going to measure that down at this bottom end. And we're staying pretty much right on. Again, we'll have this slightly bigger top and bottom, and I'm pretty happy with that. The next thing I need to do, I really need to make the quilt label before I assemble this. So let me do that, and then I need to think about how I want to deal with these corners a little bit better. Well, hello, Mushu. Buddy, this is not the place for kitty cat. It's not. So let's talk about a quilt label. I have 3 other bell pulls that I've made from round robin blocks here. Each one of them I've just used a piece of muslin, I folded under the edges, and then either whip stitched it down like on these 2, or on this one I used a little feather stitch to stitch it down. When I've done these, I've kind of drawn out the blocks, and then I've put the person's name and where they were from, because people have come from all over. I want to go ahead and make a similar type quilt label. Now the other thing I have done with these is I usually put some type of a hanging pocket on the top. And a lot of that's because when I teach, I can hang these up pretty easily. It also makes it easy to put thumbtacks through if I want to, or a lot of times I just put a safety pin roughly centered that I can hang on a little nail or a thumbtack. Now that I can do later. I have my muslin, which I just squared up a little bit. I have my project booklet, so this went with the blocks on the round robin. So the booklet tells a little bit about what I was hoping for in the blocks, and I think I've shown this before, but then each person wrote a little bit about what they were doing on the blocks. So I have that for reference. I've got a ruler, this one's 6.5 inches square, and that I'll use to draw my lines. I have a water erasable pen, and I have a micron pen, which is an archival permanent pen to use. What I want to do is I want to make something very similar to this one. So I'll put the title of it. So it's just my autumn round robin, and I'll put the year, and then it'll say pieced and assembled by me, but it'll have this year's date on it. And then I'll put who the work is by and where they're from. I'm just going to draw some lines here because I think I need that just for my own peace of mind here. So I'm just going to draw around here. I just am giving myself a bit of a framework for this, especially since this piece of fabric, despite my squaring it up, is still not quite fully square. And that gives me something to work off of. So I'm going to go from the top. Let's draw a line across here. And I think I'll put one here. This one has 6 blocks, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that'll work. The reason I use the water-soluble one is that way if I make any mistakes, I can still have ample time to correct it. I don't need a really big diagram here, I just need something that I can use as my guideline. So that when I do draw it with pen, I know it's correct and I've made all my mistakes and things ahead of time with the removable ink. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Good. Okay. And I'm just drawing 2 lines for each block, and I'm just eyeballing them. I could be more precise. I suppose this one's going to say autumn, and I'm going to say DYB round robin. And it's going to say pieced and assembled by, and then my name. And we started this when? think there's a date list. 2010, 2024 now. Wow. So now I am getting ready to use my marking pen, and this is a Micron pen with archival ink. I'm just using the one that says PN on it. I find that works just as well as any of the other fine point ones. I'm just going to do my lettering, and I do find it helpful to hold the fabric still as I do this. And you know, if it comes out a little off, I'm not going to worry too much about it. And you'll see that I'm also not staying exactly where I had written before. And I decided to put CQI, that was the group that I was in when I did this. Okay, well, you don't need to see me do this whole thing here, so I will be back. For my straight line, I am going to use my ruler, and then I'll finish that out. All right, so there is my block, and I'm going to just dampen that and get rid of the blue, and then I'm going to press my edges under, and then I'll be able to stitch that on to the back of the bell pull. So let me show you what I did. I forgot to turn on the overhead camera. I trimmed off the bulk here at the corners, and then I started stitching. So my knot actually went underneath the edge. We're going to leave this unpinned for the most part while I stitch, because I want to be able to stitch both sides and then readjust these ends as I need. Now to stitch this down, I'm just doing a whip stitch along the edge, and I'm just using a regular sewing thread. I have a sharps needle that I have threaded with a length of that, and I have my thimble, which allows me to stitch a little faster, a little less discomfort to my fingers. What I'm doing is I'm just going straight down into the fabric, but not through the backing, but I am going through that flannel interlining, and then I bring it up. I'm going about 3/16 of an inch, I think, and picking up just a thread or two on the edge of that fold. And it goes by pretty quickly. And with my finger underneath, I can tell that I'm not going through all the way to the back, that it tells me when I need to come back up a little bit, and then just going down. And so it'll feel a little bit different depending on the kind of fabric you're going through. But this stitching is pretty quick for the most part. I don't think it will take me very long. In fact, I seriously doubt it will take me even an hour to get this stitched. I'm going to go ahead and stitch both long sides, and then we'll come back and do the top and bottom and make sure that they're nice and even. I certainly could machine stitch this, but on something that's a completely hand-stitched project, I really don't want that machine stitching showing on the front. This is just nice, quiet work at the end of a project. You get a chance to think about everything that you've been doing. I don't know about you, but I really appreciate having that reminiscing time. This project has been in the works for, it's 14 years. My gosh. But it's nice to think about the project and all the people who are involved in it. How wonderful it is to finally have another project being completed. I had a birthday here, and I am definitely feeling very aware of my age at the moment. I think we go along in life and we think for so many years we have so much life left, and then all of a sudden you realize you've passed the halfway point, and then you've passed probably the 3/4 point, and then all of a sudden you're counting down specific years rather than decades. I'm really glad to be getting some things done that I've wanted to get done. Now I'm down here near the corner. Rather than putting this and going over, I am going to stitch down just slightly, because I think it will help it maintain its shape a little bit better. So I've just opened out that seam, and I'm stitching under. I'll tie my knot here and trim that off. I'm not going to stitch this just yet, but I am going to stick a pin back in it just to kind of hold it in place. And we're going to come over on that other side. I'm going to start back a little further. I didn't do that up at the initial end. That's okay. We'll remedy that. So I think it's taken me about 20 minutes aside. And now that I've got that out of the way, I'm going to pin this one back down. And I'll keep going. I've just about reached the end of my second side. I'm going to make my knot, and I'll show you how I'm going to deal with these corners. On this one, rather than just starting over again, I am going to just weave my needle through and come out down here where I'm going to be turning that. I'm still a little bit up from it, if you can see, so I'm going to angle it down just a little further. I want to come out as close to that corner as possible. And now I'm there. And I'm looking at this. Is it straight? Do I need to adjust anything? I think it's actually pretty good. Now I'm going to come up and I'm just going to whip stitch this edge in the same way. I don't want that open gap there. To minimize my stitch, I want to make sure the thread comes across straight and that the diagonal is all on the interior of that. And I'm really just trying to pick up those outer threads a little bit better. And so I'm going to take an extra tack or two right there where it joins up. And so now I'm going to have a nice neat corner, and I'm going to whip stitch across the same way. That other end I'm going to tuck down under. I don't want to be stitching through it. So I'm going to take smaller stitches again right here at this corner just to keep things tucked in nice and tight. And then the further I get away from that corner, then I can go back to my bigger 3/16. But I want that corner nice and snug and tight. Now I should be able to go back to my usual stitch length. I'm also taking care of where there's embroidery right up near it. I'm trying not to catch those stitches in the hemming process. And then once I finish this corner, I'm going to go and do the same thing on the other end. Last little bit. We are done with that part of it. There's our top. So next let's put the label on. So this is the bottom, so I'm going to turn it over. And I'm going to put this down here near the bottom. I am eyeballing it. I think that looks as square as it's going to get. So I'm going to pin this both sides and top and bottom. I've got my needle and thread, and we're going to whip stitch this little label on. I'm going to start up near the top. I don't need to worry so much about going through that flannel interlining layer. I can just be stitching through the Osnaburg. Since I'm working from the back side, I want to really make sure I'm not going through to the front. I'm just going to check it and make sure we're staying good. Hi, buddy. You going to come lay down with me? Finn often likes to stitch with me. Here he is. Oh, that's a sweet boy. That's a sweet boy. It definitely adds a new element into stitching here. But he likes to just sit and snuggle, and I'm going to say usually holds pretty still. Now, since I've said that, he probably won't. There's 3 sides are done. Let's get this last side stitched, and this is done. So there is the quilt label sewn on. The last thing to do is to turn this scrap of muslin into a hanging pocket. I will iron this, and I'll turn under the edges, and I'll just stitch along each edge. And then once I've done that, I'll stitch the opening together to make a tube. I always try to make it narrower than what my project is. Usually I aim for 1/2 inch, and I just did this one without measuring it, so it's a little wider, but it's still going to be fine. It's not going to show from the front. It usually needs to be 4 or 4.5 inches deep so that whatever rod will fit through it. And so I just folded it under and stitched the ends, and then I stitched and pressed that open. Now I'm going to turn it right side out. I always kind of like that seam to be on the bottom where it's going to not impact things. For stitching it on, I need to fold it down about 1 inch. And so I'm going to press that fold, and I'm going to press this fold. My next trick is to put this on here. I want to do it so that it's not going to show on the outside. I usually stitch my bottom edge first, so I'm going to pin that. And then I'm going to pin this edge, and that edge will be where I sew. So I'm going to stitch this bottom one first, and then I'll come back and stitch the top one, and I'm going to do it exactly the same as everything else I've been doing. And I want to make sure that I am not going through to the front. I don't mind picking up the interlining on this one because it gives it more stability. There's my pocket, so you can see it's got some give so that there's room for whatever thickness of a board or whatever it has in it, or a rod. I can thumbtack through it, or a safety pin to use as a ring to hang it on. So what I discovered is I don't really like the really big ones. Let's just see what I've used here. This one has a smaller one. That's the size I'm looking for, and I think that's what I've got here. So let's see here where we're at. We have 1, 3. So here's the center. I want to put it so it goes through right there. Let's go hang it on the wall and take a look. Here's the autumn bell pull hanging in my office. I'm really pleased with how it turned out. It's one of those projects that's been in the works for so long, and now that I have it together, I realize that it might be one of my favorite round-robin projects that I was ever involved with. I really love each one of the blocks. The stitching on this project was so beautiful. From each block, they're just wonderfully creative, beautifully stitched, and I really am so happy with how it turned out. Thank you so much for coming along with me on this entire project as we looked at the blocks individually and made decisions about what needed to happen, and then as we made changes, as I planned and embroidered my own block on this project, and then in this video of the putting together of it. I'm just so pleased with how it turned out, and I hope you've enjoyed coming along for the journey. Thank you so much for watching. Happy stitching, and I'll see you in the next video.